Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's adequately caffeinated. Welcome to the AI revolution. This isn't actually, I should have said, when I said welcome to the AI revolution, that sounds like you've all been indoctrinated into some sort of cause. Welcome to the AI revolution. Should we issue warnings or welcomes panel here from the potential to erode just trust through deepfakes and AI-powered misinformation to dangers around undermining job security and creative innovation? There are genuine threats and challenges that this technology poses to both journalism and wider society. Like it or not, when we talk about journalism, it is very much already here. News organisations are already producing AI-assisted stories and information at scale. And outside of newsrooms, there are huge challenges in spotting those deepfakes and discerning AI-generated imagery, among other things. Generative AI, and we're going to get one of the panel to explain what we mean by generative AI, brings the promise of empowering journalists and citizens alike towards deeper investigative research and improved transparency, accountability and justice. But what flaws, biases and dangers do we need to be aware of as we incorporate these new technologies? So this panel will discuss all the ways in which generative AI, so we're just looking specifically at generative AI, will impact investigative journalism, whether positive, negative or potentially unforeseen. So we're going to welcome the panel. Unfortunately, we couldn't have Anne Alexander here with us today. She's a Senior Research Associate at the University of Cambridge. And I was going to say Anne was very much going to fill a lot of the side towards the dangers, I think, of AI. I think that's sort of fair to say. But between the panel here, we're definitely going to kind of cover that side. So I'm going to welcome you first to Professor Paul Bradshaw. Paul, would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so I run a Masters in Data Journalism at Birmingham City University. I also work as a data journalist at the BBC Shared Data Unit, and I train journalists in a range of things: data journalism, investigations, online journalism in the UK and internationally. And I've written a bunch of books about it. Yeah.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Give a big round of applause for Paul Bradshaw. I'm going to pass you on to Kelsey Farish. Kelsey, media solicitor specialising in the legal, ethical and practical implications of generative AI. Am I correct?
You are indeed. I've not written a bunch of books, but I have written a lot of blog posts and articles. But just by way of background, I started out as a IP and media lawyer. And I've always been really fascinated by the stories that we tell each other through audiovisual and literary mediums. And what's really important, I think, for all of us is the way in which our stories and our public image are portrayed in the public sphere. And I consider this to be a human right. And so when deepfakes crashed onto the scene in 2017 or so, and people were using them to superimpose the faces of actors onto sexually explicit videos, I was one of the first practicing lawyers to sit up and think, well, if this happened to me, what laws could I use to get rid of this sort of video? And that has led me on a journey over the last 6 or 7 years to exploring misinformation, disinformation, and criminal laws about Gen AI. But more recently, I've been very pleased to be working with film studios, including major streaming giants and artists who are using the technology for really creative, innovative, and powerful things. And I'm sure we're going to get into that.
Fantastic. Big round of applause for Kelsey Farish. Thanks. Thanks for that. And we've got Joseph Olufemi, media development practitioner, entrepreneur, and the founder of DataFight. Joshua, can you tell us a little bit about DataFight, about yourself?
Okay. I guess I'll say my journey is an interesting one. Started out as a community radio advocate about 15 years ago, trying to see how you can, do that media pluralism in the country, and then moved on to do investigative journalism, and later on into thinking about media sustainability as a whole, and that led me into doing a lot of, product innovation. From social, accountability products to fact-checking or verification products, and then started DataFight. And the whole idea around DataFight is thinking about the tangentials of media services as a way to, rethink media sustainability. If you take all the skills in research and the data that journalists, work with, and you can use that to think of, generating revenue, and they're using that to support that social justice or social purposes of journalism, that's the whole idea behind Dataflight. How do you, not just use data for storytelling, but use data also as a service to power things like what we're talking about now. How do we start to take the data in journalism, to support, or if you like, to also hold AI accountable in one way or the other. So that's just a little bit. I guess we'll get into it much more later.
Thank you. Let's hear for Joshua. I think, there we go. We've got this mic back on now, so this might help. Okay, so let's start. Let's get some ground rules in place. So let's define what generative AI is first. Does anyone want to take that one? Paul?
Yeah, go on, yeah. So I was saying earlier that you may well have seen many diagrams kind of explaining how different parts of AI relate to each other, and it was only when I kind of tried to draw one of these diagrams myself for all branches of AI that I realised that all these diagrams are kind of misleading, that everything kind of overlaps with everything else. So that artificial intelligence as a field is about 70 years old. It's generally just the idea of trying to replicate an appearance of intelligence, and that can involve actually very basic technology. The recent technologies are about trying to teach a computer to learn in some way. So it might be identifying relationships. Basically, it's very fancy statistics. It's correlation, it's regression. It's in the same way as people are trying to predict how many seats Labour are going to have tomorrow. Just take those principles and apply them on a massive scale with masses of data points. And that's essentially what most artificial intelligence involves. Some of it involves understanding language, some of it involves replicating language. So those are fields like natural language understanding, natural language processing. Machine learning is another branch, and generative AI takes in all the tools that generate images, audio, video, and text. So tools like ChatGPT are a specific part of generative AI called large language models, which are about generating text. And essentially it's about predicting the next word based on these relationships, these statistical relationships that have been identified by giving algorithms large amounts of text to learn from.
So it's something that's come to the public consciousness quite a lot recently in the last 2 years. And is it fair to say that's because we now have these sort of front-facing tools that people can actually interact with? So AI has been around for a while, algorithmic-based learning has been around for a while, but now we can actually start playing with a lot of these generative AI tools. Does anyone want to talk us through some of the things that are out there that maybe people are using already? Go for it, Paul, if you want.
Well, a bit of a history is that, the news industry has been using machine learning for over a decade. Areas like subscription management, those sorts of things, kind of content recommendation. So that type of AI has been around for a long time. To an extent, some automation, kind of automated weather reports, things like that, financial reports through natural language processing. But it is basically the introduction of ChatGPT at the end of 2022 that just changed everything, because it was a tool as easy to use as Google. If you wanted to, I was doing machine learning 5 years ago. It's very, very difficult to do. Yeah. Okay. ChatGPT is not difficult. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know what. Yeah.
Kelsey, do you think people were really shocked at how, and I use this word in an unbiased way, how good ChatGPT was? Do you think people were really shocked at how effective it was at doing stuff?
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right. And just by way of metaphor, because I'm one of these people who thinks in obnoxious metaphors, but I've got a toddler and he's 2, and he's just now starting to not just say words, but construct little sentences. But so much of that is obviously exposure. So you could think of things that my husband and I say to him is like the data set. And it's repetition. It's exposure, it's repetition. If he sits down and says, "Mommy, I want coffee," which is what he said this morning, that's a coherent, legitimate sentence. It's a bit off-putting though, because this is a toddler. The reason why I say this is just because ChatGPT is giving you output that looks real, that looks authentic. It's just because it's based on its exposure and its pre-existing training, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that it has a mind of its own. Now, with that to one side, yes, I think people are really surprised that the generative power of ChatGPT is really quite good. Same thing with Midjourney. And people, I mean, the range of opportunities is really incredible. I can use it to design itineraries for my family that is visiting from overseas. I was in a rush a couple of days ago for another presentation, and I literally said to ChatGPT, I need to do all of these different things, and I've got 45 minutes to do it. What do you recommend I spend my time on and in what order? It literally told me when I should blow dry my hair. I mean, the limits, there really are none. So yeah, I think that people are just now waking up to the fact that this is more than just, spitting out some text. You can actually use it to make really cool things. But again, importantly, it's only as good as the training and the prompt. And I'm sure Paul or Joshua, you'll get into that later.
Yes, Joshua, do you fancy having a go at large language models? What that means, how I mean, a lot of these services that we've talked about here use a large language model. Do you feel confident talking about that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay. What's a large language model for the people at home?
I guess the best way to look at it is putting a very large amount of data, right, and using it to train, a model to perform certain types of, activity or perform certain types of, action.
Yeah. And
you can then have that, in different applications, right? So what you will have in, OpenAI's ChatGPT and all the rest is one. Of course, you then have, that Gemini Google is bringing out, and then you have the Llama 2, right? So it's more or less doing different iterative, activities based on what, the data set that is being used to. So as far as I intend to simplify it, is just the bulk of data that is provided, for the machine or the computer to be able to perform certain kind of things. Yeah. But I mean, in terms of possibilities of what it's able to then do, I mean, just from the point she was raising, I guess where the fascination comes in, right? People thinking, when you say large language model, it then means that you've given it an entire large volume.
Everything.
Right, everything.
Everything that's ever happened
right.
until now
but
is fed into
it's pretty much, taking it from what Paul said, it's pretty much just statistics, right? It's just doing some kind of, probability, and then using that probability to predict the next thing. So it's not as if you're giving it like 50 gigabyte of data sets to be able to perform 50 gigabyte volume of output. It's just so much that it's able to adapt. It's the adaptive capacity that it has, relying on probability that then makes it, that old large language model and the rest of, that nomenclature, if you like.
I mean, history repeats itself, and I think that a lot of stories repeat themselves. And this is, Paul, you'll be able to speak about this, I'm sure. It's if we look at data and if we look at patterns, this is why we're very familiar with things that repeat themselves. AI just capitalizes on that.
Yeah. A lot of these tools, and a lot of new technologies quite often don't work amazingly well all the time, do they? Because we're still are we still in beta phase with ChatGPT? Someone might be able to help me out with that.
I don't know if it's officially beta, but certainly we're in the experimentation phase.
We're in this experimentation phase. Yeah. How are we starting to use then, as in investigative journalism, what are we sort of seeing being used already? Because we've talked a bit about how newsrooms are using things to produce kind of stories at scale. And probably about 7 or 8 years ago where Herbs Media did a talk in one of the BBC Shared Data Unit conferences where they talked about how you can basically use machine learning effectively to write stories and pop those out. And then I know some of the news agencies did actually adopt Herbs Media to sort of start generating stories. Basically, you feed it in a data set and it can localize it for you. Effectively, that's my job as a human to do. And so it's slightly concerning to a lot of the people in the room. They were basically booed out of there, weren't they, Herbs Media, at the time. But, obviously that was when there wasn't so much kind of understanding about this sort of thing. Paul, can you tell us how in investigative journalism, people are starting to use generative AI products? And would you mind passing that down?
Well, so I think most of the uses of AI in investigative journalism have been using machine learning rather than generative AI. So that might be things like, and often it's needle in a haystack type jobs. So we have 100,000 reports on misconduct in hospitals. We want to identify the 20,000 that relate to sexual misconduct, for example. So that's a problem that an Atlanta Journal investigation tackled with machine learning. So they trained an algorithm to recognise reports that would likely be sexual misconduct. And then they would manually look at those. So it's a filtering process. With generative AI, I think a lot of the uses have been quite prosaic, quite ordinary, not necessarily the kind of spectacular, impressive stuff. So, and actually the radar Herbs Media example is a really low tech. It's often described as NLP, natural language processing, but really it's just a template. You're just creating a template that says in, and then you say, okay, fetch the name of the area, crime went, and then it's going to be up or down or stayed the same, by, and then there's a calculation, and it's just filling up in those fields. That's kind of a very basic type of thing that generative AI is a little bit more creative in doing. And you could use generative AI to do the same thing, but you would lose the control over it. And I think that's where you do get into spending more time than you really want to, whereas a template might be more boring, but more reliable, more trustworthy. So that would be one example. Coding, I think, is a really interesting example. So a lot of investigative journalists who are writing code to analyse data or fetch data or communicate, visualise data, that's where generative AI is, I think, is most useful, because I've seen it accelerate learning very quickly, allow journalists to do things that they weren't capable of doing. And there's none of that, it definitely saves time, and there's none of that concern over, is this correct, because it's not a fact, it's just functioning code. It either works or it doesn't. So those are a couple of uses. I'm trying to think of anything more spectacular.
Yes. So when we think about investigative journalism, what are we really saying? We're talking about uncovering stories that might otherwise go unnoticed or underreported or ignored, right? I'm working with a startup, a European startup called The Newsroom. And using generative AI models, they're helping reporters and analysts discover what isn't being said. How are they doing that? By analyzing all of the stories that are out there and then finding gaps and then saying, look, the BBC is saying this, Sky's saying this, Fox News, CNN, they're saying all of these same things. 80% is very similar, but the differences are these 20% outliers. And you can combine different prompts or questions that can illuminate what's being overlooked. And this isn't an answer or the full picture, but it's a tool that helps reporters and other journalists get at what really matters, right? So it's not going to necessarily write the story in a great way or a good grant application or a contract in my perspective, but what it can do is say, look, by analyzing all of this data, I'm able to show you these things. Now it's up to you, human journalists, to make the most of it. And I've written extensively kind of on how human oversight is going to be important no matter how good the tech gets. So I just want to emphasize that it's not an end-all be-all. We still need very good reporters to control. If someone gives me a fighter jet, it could be the best fighter jet in the world. I don't know how to fly it, right? So you need trained professionals in the room. I told you I speak in metaphors. But,
That's good. That's good. I want to come to Joshua, and then I want to come back to the legal implications that we might see. So Joshua, okay, you're very much at the forefront of this. But so tell us a bit more about your platform.
Right.
Sorry, you're going to talk anyway. I don't know why.
I just wanted to buttress the point that she was making about application, right? Paul has been able to give us various spectrum that you can say you apply it to in investigative journalism. But just following the metaphor, kind of look at it from speed and scale at which investigative journalists can go about what they do. I mean, examples would be you have like 5,000 documents or legal documents, and you're trying to pick out certain things in there. For instance, data and digital rights violations within the laws, and you're able to say, oh, help me do this analysis and help me get, which is just basic name entity identification, right? Yeah. Yes, we say it's simple because it's easier for us or for a Paul who has always done machine learning, programming and the rest. But for a typical journalist, that work is done faster and at a scale that is not normal. I mean, the other ramification is now that you can then use it for some level of verification, especially if you're doing natural language processing in that manner. And in that regard, something that Nubia, which is what Datafight is trying to do, is then taking advantage of generative AI to sort of decolonize, or if you like, democratize the value of AI to data journalism. For the last 10 years, for instance, across Africa, I probably have trained, working with different organizations, over 1,000 journalists to be able to do basic data journalism, the kind of thing that Paul would write about 10 years ago. How to just do basic data identification, right? Analysis, pure using Excel to do basic things. And you find out that out of 1,000 journalists you've trained, maybe 5 or 10 would take you forward for various reasons. And what we're trying to do with Nubia is say, don't worry, just have that data set and let AI help you with the analysis, right? Provide you with a first draft and then human moderation to then turn it around. But the implication is also that you would have various public data sets lying out there about Africa that nobody writes about. The localities, the cities, the councils, the communities, that you have the data here and there, but nobody has ever written about them. So the idea is beyond just helping journalists to be able to do analysis that they wouldn't be able to do because of maybe lack of understanding of mathematics or statistics, is then that you're able to then use it to also pursue some kind of positive narrative change about Africa, as it were, because now that you can write about my community using those numbers, it's easier for anyone who probably has this bias or lack of or ignorance about Africa to then better understand it. So that's the kind of application that we're trying to put it to, which speaks to that speed and skill also.
But that's absolutely fascinating. So really, it's about kind of making access to, giving everyone the access to these things to challenge their democracy, and it might be something that may well have gone sort of wanting in the past. Is now you're sort of saying that this is going to really help in terms of in the democratic sense in Africa.
At least to a level that you still put all the ethical cautions or of journalism to say, hey, even if you write something for you as a journalist, verification is part of the principles you need to. So when you write something, you want to be sure that you didn't get the formula wrong and then give you a wrong analysis. So all of those things are there, but you can, over time, as it gets better from its experimentation to more intelligence, you're able to then, do a lot of other things. Imagine over 2,000 languages in Africa, if they were able to read the BBC News or a story written by Paul or Newsroom, right, in their own local languages. So those are possibilities, potentials, which makes it more welcoming as much as you want to tell the humans behind it to, take all the caution or the warnings, if you like.
Okay, so we've neatly set us up for this sort of next bit here. So we're talking about warnings, cautions. There has to be an element of checking. Do you know, one big thing you could say that typifies investigative journalism is that it takes a lot of legwork. It's basically, if you're going to define it in any way, I'd think it'd be journalism which takes a lot of legwork. And that it's been done, and everyone's seen Spotlight, presumably, the film. That's going through thousands of manual written ledgers between 4 people over a long, long period of time. Now, if something comes along that could potentially make the life of someone like myself easier, I would take that, which is fine. Well, okay, I'm in a newsroom, I've just blitzed this through AI, we've got a story, let's publish it today. Kelsey, what's the problem with that?
The problem is you need to run it by your lawyer.
Lawyer first. Yeah.
Okay, so Gosh, where to start? I think it's really important to say at the outset that there's a distinction as between what is lawful and what is ethical or what is moral. I am a lawyer, I'm not a philosopher, so I'm going to tell you what the law says, not what I think it should say, or my hopes, dreams, ambitions, like vote the people that you want in office and then they can make the laws, okay? The things that we need to be concerned about from a journalistic perspective, from a publisher's perspective is, am I going to get sued? And there are different ways that you can get sued. You can be sued because you've written something that you're presenting as fact, but is harming someone's reputation. So you're calling someone a pedophile when they're not. If it's true, you can say that. Of course, this is basic reputational law 101. But the other thing, in addition to saying something that's not true, is also the copyright implications. So basically, we need to look at what the story or the report says. Is it invading someone's privacy? Is it hurting someone's reputation? Is there a serious implication for misleading audiences? And then the other piece is, how is that story made? So again, metaphor, forgive me. Did you buy the ingredients to make your cake legally, or did you steal them from the store? That's the first piece, that's copyright. The second piece is, if someone eats that cake, are they gonna get sick? That's reputational harm, defamation, privacy invasion, and so on. So what I do is I help you journalists bake your cake, I guess. The issue with copyright is that we don't always know where those data sets are coming from. And so there's a question currently being fought in the courts, many courts rather, as to whether or not using data without an appropriate copyright license underneath it is a copyright infringement. Yeah. And I don't know the answer to that question.
So we're still in a huge law grey. I mean, that's really important to say, isn't it? We're on a massive law grey area.
The way that the law is currently written is, in order to violate copyright, a human needs to unlawfully copy it unless an exception applies. A lot of these AI developers are saying, haha, got you, lawyered. I didn't infringe the copyright, the algorithm did. So a human is not doing the infringing. That's the first piece. The second argument is, if I'm hearing the ideas and the thoughts and the images and the words in my environment, and then I go home and I think about it, and I maybe use a few of your words, and I use some of your ideas, and I write a paper, am I infringing your copyright? Now, technically, in a way, if it's written down, you get automatic copyright protection, right? But I'm transforming it. I'm making it my own. I'm using my own skill sets and the ideas of other people to create something new. So you can see how AI developers are thinking, well, this isn't an exact copy. It's inspired by these other words. It's inspired by the New York Times, but it's actually not exactly word for word what the New York Times said. Therefore, it's not copyright infringement. This is a much larger, again, philosophical, theoretical conversation about what is and what is not copyright infringement. But the key issues, back to what you said, is the output hurting someone or falling foul of journalistic principles generally, in which case I don't care if it was created by Gen AI or otherwise. And then the fundamental piece as well is the way you made it, are the ingredients lawful? Are you using a proper platform to do that?
There's been, apologies if this puts you on the spot.
No, it's a bit of a brain dump for me, sorry.
No, precedent. Do we have any precedent-setting cases that we can look at to see where we might draw some...
For AI specifically?
For AI specifically.
No.
I know there have been a couple with the use of images and the copyright issues.
So it might be useful to say that the current copyright law that's on the books was... It was published. It was passed 1988. It's as old as I am. And a lot has happened since then. I remember watching VHS tapes as a kid. And so in my lifetime alone, we've gone from VHS to TikTok, right? Copyright law simply did not envisage what we see today. It didn't envisage social media. It certainly didn't envisage Gen AI to what we have today. So the problem that we have is the laws on the book are just not good enough. And so when that happens, there are two ways to sort things out legally. There's contract law. So the parties agree to themselves, I let you do this, even though the law says that I'm going to let you do this. And the other way is through lawsuits. And the lawsuits, we've got about 25 live lawsuits regarding generative AI on both sides of the Atlantic, and they're still in very early stages. Like, lawyers are still putting together their drafts. Now, that basically means we don't have good law. And the UK, the current government, for the next however many hours, is taking a very pro-innovation approach, which means they want to sit back and let the market sort it out themselves.
Sure. Yeah. But I mean, I'm sort of stick with you a little bit here.
That's fine.
Your professional opinion, is there a legislative problem we've got there then, especially here in the UK? Is the legislation not caught up, then, do you think? Or do you think it is something that the market should just sort of sort out?
No, it's a really good question, and the answer is it depends.
Yeah.
So if let's say I'm using a generative AI platform that has lawfully and responsibly sourced data sets. It's all done legit. It didn't copyright infringe on the data sets. It's a legit platform. And it uses, and I say, write a story about Professor Bradshaw. Like, I want this to be like a really salacious story. And it uses its AI knowledge to create a horrible story about yourself, and I publish it. Now, like I said, I can use pre-existing law about defamation, about libel, to address that problem. I don't need an AI-specific law to address a story that's published in a newspaper about you that harms your reputation. So there is an argument that says that actually the laws that we have on the books it's sufficient in a lot of ways, not all, but many. And that's where we just use our common sense, right? But the other issues, like misinformation, like the liability that X has for Gen AI content that could potentially, completely disrupt electoral processes, those laws I don't think are up to scratch. It really depends on the specific scenario.
Okay, all right, thank you very much for that, and I appreciate you going out on a limb there. I was putting you on the spot a little bit there. But Paul, so in terms of, so not just we've covered the sort of legal grounds. We want to touch on ethics here, but on a practical sort of sense. Let's say you're using an generative AI tool to assist you with your journalistic project. You can't just take the output and run to your editor and be like, done, I'm going home early, can you? What I know you did a session yesterday, which many of you may have gone to. I think it's probably a bit early for me to use the word that you used to use for what AI did. But tell us about the checking process that you need to do once you've engaged an AI tool to help you with your work.
Well, I think the first thing is it's as someone said over there, it's not very good for writing stuff really, and the amount of time that it requires to edit that is counterproductive. And some of the earliest experiments with news organisations were them discovering that basically that I think it was it wasn't Wired, but I can't remember who it was. CNET published articles about a year ago that turned out to have all sorts of false information in it. And if you ask ChatGPT who I am, it will tell you things like I've written a book that I've not written. It will tell you that I teach an MA in data journalism at City University in London. And what it's doing there is, I used to teach it, I used to be a visiting professor at City University London, and I run an MA in data journalism at Birmingham City University, and it's kind of predicted slightly wrongly.
It's called hallucinating, is
hallucinating,
that right? Yeah.
Bullshitting to the rest of it.
That's it. I wanted you to say it, not me.
I own my own law firm and went to the University of Edinburgh, apparently, according to who is Kelsey Farish.
It makes false predictions, and I think this idea of hallucination, essentially it is a bad prediction. If we predict Labour gets 212 seats tomorrow, and it gets a majority of 212, and it gets a majority of 150. It's the similar sort of mistake, So I tend to steer clear of that, and I think that is an area to steer clear of. So I won't even start to ask it to just generate information for me in that way. I think, and with programming generally, the principle is garbage in, garbage out, and that applies both to the training data that ChatGPT or Gemini has been trained on, And it also applies to the prompt that you give it and the information that you give it. So I think a lot of people struggle with a blank page. And if that's not a problem for you, then that's not something that ChatGPT is going to be useful for. But for a lot of people, if you give it, like, here's the information that I have, generate me a first draft, in terms of speed, that might help you with your speed. If you give it 100 documents and say, find what's in these, give me page references, then that can help you with scale and speed, things that you want to be able to do. What's important is that your prompt does ask for that sort of information that can help you to verify it. So it will make up academic references, so that's not that useful. I mean, you can check them, but it's very useful to ask for page numbers and give it specific documents and say, here's a 100-page document. So I gave it 2 annual reports for Greg's, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Did you actually do that?
I did actually do this,
yeah.
So here's 2 annual reports for Greg's, like 5 years apart.
Yeah.
Tell me how its profits have changed. Tell me what the number of stores, and give me page references where I can find that information.
How effective was it at doing that?
Very effective.
Because I'm just thinking, also we're talking about investigative journalism, about its practical uses. That's a real-term practical use there, isn't it? That would be very appealing to certainly some of the.
Yeah, and ultimately, I'm not asking it to generate text. What I'm asking it to do is just tell me what page the bloody information is on. I don't want to scan through 200 pages. I can see for myself, but it will get me there a lot quicker than me doing it myself. So the verification has to be built in. There has to be a check built in. And the examples I was giving yesterday was things like ideas, explaining rules, explaining systems. Those are all processes that can get you further ahead. But ultimately, you're still going to have to, make a judgment call on those ideas. You're going to see what gaps there are in those systems, but it will get you further quicker.
Kelsey and Joshua, you're both nodding in agreement there. Kelsey, you wanted to say something.
I had the exact opposite experience. So I sometimes think of ChatGPT and similar as like really keen, really eager, really bright, like trainee lawyers with no common sense and no street smart. So I uploaded 2 redacted, no client confidential information, but 2 versions of a contract. And I said, okay, I want you to tell me, Ms. ChatGPT, what the differences in these clauses are, like the difference of these 2 30-page agreements. What it gave me is it spat out an Excel spreadsheet of like every single sentence, line item, and then whether or not that, okay, well, I changed like some paragraphs around, so of course it was going to be completely different. Whereas a more experienced lawyer would have said, okay, let's go to the key provisions. IP, this one says that there's a license of copyright that lasts for 5 years. This one says it's a license that lasts 10. I wanted a nuanced, informed, contextualized analysis. What it gave me was a very literal, we would perhaps say almost like I'm neurodivergent myself. So but a more neurodivergent approach to the very literal.
So I mean, that's the warnings. One of the things you've got to go into it being aware of, surely, then, isn't it? When you are interacting with a generative AI, you have to realise it doesn't necessarily get irony that well. You know what I mean? It has to be. It's very literal. It's going to. You've got to talk in the language of the AI.
So to give an example, I was writing a paper, and I have a tendency, as I switch hats a lot. Sometimes I write for academic texts. Sometimes I give presentations like this. Sometimes I talk to busy CEOs who don't care about detail and they just want bullet points. So I wrote a text, and then I said, on a scale of 1 to 5, how technical, how superfluous is my writing? And it said, you're at a 4.5. And I said, great. Change this into a 3 and explain it like you were explaining this concept to an intelligent high school student. And it did a great job. It helped me simplify the language. And if you come up, but this is it. I don't think many people know that you can ask ChatGPT. Or if I'm thinking about something that's really complicated that I myself don't get, I'll ask it to explain it like I'm 5, like the famous Reddit subreddit. I say, explain quantum physics like I'm 5 years old. And it does a great job of doing that. But you have to be specific in your prompts.
Joshua, I'm keen to get you in here. Ethics. So, and again, I don't want to put you on the spot here. Again, because I mean, and certainly in terms of the product you've developed, there's strong ethical groundings for you to be able to use that. You've got a principled use for it in a way. There are some ethical issues though with using AI generally for investigative journalism. One possibly being the environment. Obviously, uses a huge amount of server energy, doesn't it, to challenge, because it's challenging a lot more things at once. I'm just trying to boil it down for a 5-year-old, but trying to boil it down to a very simplified way. Joshua, what are some of the ethical implications that with, let's say, you're an investigative journalist and you're going to be using an AI tool?
So the way I explain this, I mean, every point is all of the fundamental traditional ethical, rules of investigative journalism, always keep it, in front of you, whether you're using AI or not. And why I say that is, see AI like another technology. So you wouldn't lose your investigative journalism ethics to the fact that you're using a computer to type, or that you're doing mobile, or that you're doing visualization. And I think that's how we approach it, right? So if I use Nubia or any other, RAG or, generative AI tool, I'm able, following the principle of transparency, to say this was done with the support of Nubia or any other tool. Yeah. If I, for instance, there's a tool that's been developed currently in Nigeria called Duba Audio. Yeah. What that does is to fact check audio content. And it's just basic, automation, right? So it takes the audio, converts it to text, does the NLP on the text, and then gives it back to you, and then does the verification and tells you what probably you need to check or not check, right?
But you can't just take that output and run away with it. Yeah, it puts you in the ballpark, but you've got to check the check.
So you've got to be sure that what is said to you, and we tested it at a conference. The speaker was recorded, and the speaker mentioned 50 billion, and by the time the text was converted, $5 billion, and by the time Naira, and by the time it was converted, because AI thinks more from global enough, it wrote dollars.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right? So those kind of verification principles, not giving AI like a source. What's the fundamental rule that you learn in investigative journalism about a source? Never rely on one source, right? Or never, take everything the source say. Every source has its own, sort of. So I just say apply all of the investigative journalism ethics, right? Yeah. Yeah. When AI gives you anything, or when you use it to generate, or even summarize, and that's the smart thing you will see when Paul said, I will tell you to give me the page so that I can check, right? Because sometimes it goes off and just creates something out of, but because you've sort of prompted it to say, look, you have to process this information before you give me a response. I always say the best use of AI is also sort of directly related to your level of intelligence or your level of dependence on it. So if you're very dependent, you're probably going to fall victim. I mean, an investigative journalist went to the field, did a very good legwork, and I was a mentor on the program, and I was saying, I think you should do all of this. And by the time she came back, beautifully written AI supported report. And I had to say, Joshua, don't read the beauty in this content. This is, I mean, I don't think I can ever write like that in another 10 years, right? So I had to now go for the facts in the report, which was where we started from before she learned that capacity to AI to do for her. And I think that's just it. The numbers, the fact, the information, you need to continue to verify them. So I would say apply every ethics that you've always known as an investigative journalist every time AI gives you an output or supports you to do anything. Attribution, verification, transparency, as much as possible. And then the other way, I mean, one thing that we also do, and some kind of advocacy that I'm also pushing for, is that when you're using data sets that are not open source enterprise, or something that you're getting from data subjects, as I like to call them, if there is a way you can compensate, especially if you're profiting from it, you need to do some level of compensation. Yeah. Otherwise, it's more, another way of exploitation, or if you like, colonization of data subjects.
It's a massive victory for humanity here, I think, because one of the questions we're often asked at things like this is it going to come and take our jobs? And what is a resounding no. A human needs to be at the output end to check these things. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, Paul.
I just wanted to add a few extra ethical concerns, because I think you see this with a number of new technologies. Ultimately, it comes back to all the kind of constant ethics of accuracy and transparency and things like that. I think there are some new ethical concerns that also come with new technologies. And a couple in particular are, so one is I think around information security and kind of privacy, and the information that you're putting into this. Remember, a server is just someone else's computer, the cloud is just someone else's computer. So there's that, which is, I think, kind of a little bit new. There's the environmental aspect, which I'll come on to, and then I've forgotten now what the other one was, so I'll talk about the environmental side. So, as you say, it's incredibly energy intensive. I was reading yesterday that I think Bloomberg have done a piece on, since Google started doing the AI there, its energy consumption or CO2 production has gone up 50% in
CO2,
5 years.
yeah, 50%.
Yeah. Which you just think, whoa.
I think it was already kicking out a fair bit.
Yeah. And there's this digital sobriety, which I mentioned yesterday, this kind of concept of, only using it if you have to use it. And it's a bit like, you don't have to kind of cut out meat entirely, because meat is quite...
So not about my blow drying order.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. So it was like, don't use ChatGPT to do a recipe. Yeah. So for example, my image yesterday was a hallucinating elephant. So that's what I've been spending, all that carbon dioxide emissions is just to create an elephant with dizzy eyes.
You're educating people, Paul. Like, come on, this is a bigger thing.
So I think that's an ethical consideration, and I'll try and remember what the other one was now.
I tell you what, I think we're going to have to open it up to the Q&A.
Yeah.
I'm happy to pick this up one-to-one after the session, because it's a really important point. It goes back to what I was saying about human rights implications. So this is actually my specialism, is how people's faces and voices are perpetuated. So it's a really big issue, but just to say that it's one that a lot of scholarship is being dedicated on. But yes, I think it's coming. And I think as a general comment, we're going to need, I believe, to rethink as a society what we consider to be free for all data, like what I post on Twitter or Instagram or what have you, versus what's important to keep within your own private and personal sphere. So there are 3 kind of points to that. It's the responsibility of the AI tool developer, there's the responsibility of the AI tool user, and then there's the responsibilities of the audiences. And there are different laws and things that we can look at for each of those 3 buckets.
Yeah. Did anyone else want to comment on that? What innovations are down? There's kind of partly what you were saying there as well, isn't it? What kind of innovations can we expect to see?
I think a lot of the solutions to this are at a political level.
Yeah.
And I did some research on source protection a few years ago, and it's no longer a legal issue, and essentially, it comes down to regulation, things like that. And I don't think there's any easy answers. We can't be sure that the measures that we take to protect someone today, on whether that's encryption, whether it's blurring faces, or all of these things, we can't be sure that they're not going to be unlockable in 5, 10, 20 years' time.
Is it the thin end of the wedge to something a lot worse?
Really quickly, I have fallen for a deepfake that I retweeted It was a couple years ago. It was a ridiculous thing of Donald Trump, and I was like, yeah, he is an idiot. He would have done that. Retweet. I'm supposed to be an expert, and I fell for it. So, and this is a silly example, but the risks that you outlined are real, they're tangible, they're serious, they impact society, individuals, businesses. We are still in early days, and Paul will perhaps, and Joshua indeed, will probably know more about this than I, but even at the cutting edge, leading tech expos on media production and tech, the AI that's being used right now in enterprise, it's not that sexy. But when you look at what researchers and academics and technical professionals are doing, I think things are definitely going to change in the next 12 to 18 months. So right now, early days, the fact that you're here, you're ahead of the curve. The curve is big and it's coming.
Josh, you want to say something as well?
I mean, I guess the way I look at it is it's creating more work for journalists, right? Our role is to always hold everyone to account. Businesses that want to do synthetic media as a way just to profit and don't care about what happens to those that will consume it, right? Or companies that are, training their data in a wrong way or with bias and all of those things. For me, I feel as the spectrum, if you like, lingers or extends, it makes it also more important that we need to start to pay attention to those things. I mean, Paul started talking about the energy implication. It means that we need to start to hold people to account. It's not enough to live in the euphoria of, what Gen AI can do for 5 billion, 6 billion citizens. It's also what it's not going to do when you have 50% increase in CO2, right? So all of those, the Pulitzers of this world and the Open Society will say things like algorithm accountability, but I think beyond algorithm accountability is looking at just ensuring that we, kind of get prepared that we're going to do more work than even relying on Gen AI to write the death story for us.
Yeah. I've remembered what the ethical
Yes,
issue
I
was.
wonder with you, mate.
But I think there's 3 levels to this, which is essentially the business models of journalism. And I agree. I mean, I have masses of concerns over this, not just in journalism, but kind of society more generally, how it's being used. But you've got companies using their existing business models, content eyeballs, and it kind of playing into that. I think that's quite depressing. But there's also a development of new business models where essentially what's happening is our content, if you like, our journalism is actually really valuable as training data. And the problem that ChatGPT, for example, faces is that journalism or kind of quality content is only a small proportion of the training data. So you're getting a lot of media organisations that are starting to do their own custom models that are basically, we've got our archive of material, which is really undervalued, under-monetized. We can use that archive of quality journalism as a basis for a service for our users, and already a number of publishers are starting to do that. So that is quite a positive development for me, because it's supporting quality journalism, it's supporting publishers who would otherwise struggle, and it's doing what we've been saying for about 10, 20 years publishers should start doing, which is not just publish information, but provide a service, sell a service. The ethical issue was diversity and bias.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
So
I was going to say that's
this
something
is specific to AI.
I know we're running out of time. We need to touch on that. I'm sorry, this might have to be end up being the last. It's a wonderful question. That.
So yeah,
well.
just considering the training material is biased in all sorts of ways, all the usual ways. So we need to factor that in, and we use it to check our own biases.
Just going to say, in the handouts that are available online, I've written a one-pager on different steps that journalists can take to ensure the ethical use of AI, and one of those is regarding AI bias. So it's a really easy, like BuzzFeed style, not boring lawyer style summary on the handouts page.
I think we've covered the yin and the yang here of AI. I dare say Anne may have gone a little bit stronger as well, but can we just hear it for the panel there? A big round of applause for everyone. That's us. So yeah, enjoy the rest of your day, and you're going to be hovering around afterwards to chat to catch them afterwards to chat to them. So yeah, cheers everyone, thanks.